The Centurion Project. Written by the 8th Day of Night. Chapter 35. Laying the Groundwork. Part 1. Elias had a heavy scowl on his face as he stalked through the long castle halls. A massive series of migraines had developed after the third week of waking up in the early morning, rather than in the afternoon. He cursed his choice to be a night guard. It had effectively ruined his sleep schedule. And with the departure of his living pillows, Elias had found little sleep in the first few days following the acceptance of his new position. It didn't help that it had taken direct orders from both princesses to get him to stop sifting through the absolute mountains of paperwork that he had to fill out. Bookbinder did her best to soften the blow, but many of the forms required his personal signature. And even with the stamp Luna had given him, Elias had done his job and read through each form in detail, making sure he wasn't putting his name to anything he disagreed with. 2 forms had slid in sneaky conditions that would have effectively made him a slave to the crown, though when he brought it up with Luna, she had flown into a blistering rage, eradicating the forms and sending a few dozen scribes to change the language in the archives. While a bit overzealous, it had eased his fears about further manipulation from the Pony Princess. Another form had also prevented him from actually recruiting anyone, being that he was not a biological citizen of Equestria. That form had also been burned, but by Celestia rather than Luna. The White Alicorn had recognized the hoof writing and had found that it had been a recent amendment put forth by one of her generals, Sir Orange Juice. The pony had been subsequently stripped of his rank in front of his peers, and when he tried to protest, Celestia threatened to strip his noble title as well. That had shut the unicorn up, and he had fled the throne room in disgrace. Celestia then said in no uncertain terms that anyone found trying to usurp Elias' position would be met with severe punishment. Perhaps it had been a show for his benefit, but Elias had found that he trusted the White Alicorn just a hair more. It wasn't anywhere close to the devotion she likely sought from him, but it colored her slightly lighter shade of manipulative in his eyes. Without having to check his back constantly for people trying to stab it, Elias had made good headway with the help of his subordinates. Well over 300 guards had submitted applications for the Legion, and while a few were sent back to their respective guard forces at the request of the other generals, Elias had already had a good base of experience from which to build his Legion. Though he would keep the positions fluid until he was sure the ponies were the right fit, he had already offered out all his commanding positions. Chief Strategist was assigned to Scarlet, on the promise that the stallion would maintain his bed rest, as well as study for the advanced tactics test that Elias would put him through. He had given the Pegasus a wealth of handwritten study materials, and every time he stopped by the infirmary to discuss medical supplies with Steel Scalpel, Scarlet was always hard at work. His bed lined with books and open notebooks. He usually didn't register Elias' presence, and when he did, he gave a wave and a grunt, not even looking up as he studied away. Elias hoped the Pegasus would succeed. It had surprised him when Ice Blossom submitted an application, and when he had called her forth to ask why, she had claimed it was simply because she missed serving with her friends. While he was sure that it was part of the reason, Elias suspected there was more at play, especially when Chaser didn't pester him to reclaim his sister for the Royal Guard. It rankled Elias to think that one of the ponies were trying to plant spies, but he needed her experience. A Royal Guard would be an excellent role model, and with his plans for training, a pony role model was what he needed most. Either way, he put her up for one of the Centurion positions, and he knew without a doubt that she would work well as one of the training officers. Another pony that had surprised him was Grey Granite, who had submitted an application only for an officer's role. Elias had granted the request mostly out of curiosity. The pony was newer to the guard than he was, and he was so soft-spoken. How such a pony would fare in a leadership position Elias didn't know, but if he failed, Elias would throw him back to the Lunar Guard. Nightshade would be happy to have another capable fighter at least. On a more personal level, things had been going swimmingly with his adjusted relationships. Mostly. Luna had been respectful in her modification of their relationship, but the more he dwelled on it, and the more Elias had extremely mixed feelings about the whole arrangement. On one hand, it had put him on edge. He wasn't supposed to have any friends, but he had caved instantly the moment she pressured him. If it hadn't been done in private, Elias would have worried about how that reflected on him and his word, but as it was, he couldn't help but feel happy of keeping one close confidant. He had poured out a piece of his very soul to Luna, then turned on his heel and said they wouldn't speak again for 7 months? No. He liked their modified arrangement better, especially when he had ambushed her and hammered out the details of their professional relationship sessions. Though the Alicorn tried to fight him on writing out the rules, Elias had managed strength in that department, and together, They agreed on a once-a-week, 1-hour session in which they did nothing but sit, talk, and relax. Though she had complained about it, Elias had also stipulated a maximum of 1 physical gesture per session, meaning that no matter what, he couldn't be made softer. So far, though she had silently complained about all of these rules, it had worked out well, and when he was around the alicorn, Elias felt greatly relaxed. It let him just talk, and they often spoke of little nothings, primarily their work schedules and how much they despised them. While they chatted, Elias came up with new, better ways to organize his legion. He kept a pad of paper with him at all times, and Luna always watched with a smile as his hand moved with lightning speed across the pages, recording his ideas with ease. He didn't know why, but that smile always seemed to encourage him, and whenever he saw it, ideas seemed to flow freer. On occasion, Elias even asked Luna about one point or another, taking her input into consideration and adjusting his plans accordingly. Unfortunately, not all of her suggestions could be implemented, and Elias had been forced to be cruel when it had come to time to address his initial picks for the officer positions. He made sure to make it clear that their previous friendships no longer had value, and that anyone wishing to remain personally close had to retire, effective immediately. Though there had been a few protests, Elias didn't waver his position, and in the end, they all fell in line, making the same sort of threats that Bookbinder had. Elias had no issue accepting said threats, so long as the ponies giving them would focus until their job was over. Afterward, Elias would just give them free rein. He just wanted to see them all survive. The rest of the day had been spent running the officers through the basics of his training plans, as well as all the necessary protocols and punishments. Elias had received some disgusted looks when he brought out a pair of lashes he had made, but no pony vocalized their protests, and Elias knew that when it came time to use the beating instruments, they would either use them, or they would leave his legion. The entire time, Elias made notes on the strengths and weaknesses of their officers, collecting a thick packet of notes on each one as he decided precisely where they would be most useful. It was going to take some work, but Elias felt confident that he could make the right choices. Elias struggled not to groan as he massaged his temple. Under his arm was a thick bundle of papers he was hoping to get approved by his fellow generals, and while he had no issue designing the recruiting materials for his legion, the rest of the generals apparently wanted help with their recruiting strategies, so Elias was forced to pitch in, or be subject to an endless stream of complaining from one of the other ponies on how he wasn't contributing to the greater effort. The day's meeting, which was strangely earlier than most, was about the subject, and Elias knew he would be expected to attend, despite only barely learning about it in passing. He would have looked like a fool to show up 2 hours late, and with the wrong materials. That certainly would have done no favors to his credibility with the ponies. Elias passed by another guard, who was a mare, surprisingly enough. He had so far only seen female guards on his morning walk, and it confused Elias, especially given that the guard was almost an even split on the male-to-female ratio, with it leaning ever so slightly in the male's favor. Yet all the guards he had seen since he gotten up were female guards ponies. Each and every one of them had also given him the same strange look that the Thestral was giving him as he strode by, turning the corner to the hallway leading to the back entrance of the throne room. Elias cast a glance over his shoulder to find the pony sniffing the air in his passing, and her eyes seemed to light up as he hit the throne room doors. They quickly shut behind him, and the strangeness was forgotten as he caught the sight of his fellow generals, or rather, 4 of them. Elias rubbed at his forehead again as he made his way to the table, letting his satchel fall upon it with a thud. Everfree and Midnight Chaser gave him a shocked look, while Starry Skies gave him the same eyes that the guard had given him. She sniffed the air, then smiled widely at him. Elias might have found it creepy if he hadn't been staring at Nightshade, who was rubbing herself against Chaser's side. The mare had eyes only for the Pegasus next to her, and she purred loudly as she nipped at his neck. Elias raised an eyebrow, but said nothing to either of them as he looked to Everfree.
Good morning. I believe we're supposed to be discussing recruiting strategies. What are you doing here, Bright?
Chaser replied bluntly. Elias cocked his head at the Pegasus, doing his best to ignore Nightshade as he rammed her forehead into the pony's neck. Why the Thestral was acting like an overly affectionate cat, Elias didn't know, and he wouldn't let it distract him.
It's a planning meeting. While I have already developed and begun implementing my recruitment strategies, everyone else had expressed an interest in having my assistance to better draw in recruits.
He gestured towards his satchel.
So I've prepared an example of my strategies, and had my auditor create samples for each branch that you can use to develop your own strategies. If you need any assistance understanding or implementing the materials, I am here to consult with.
He shrugged.
Why wouldn't I be here? And speaking of, where is everyone else?
Chaser and Everfree exchanged looks. The zebra grabbed the satchel and quickly removed all the paperwork within, while Chaser bit his lip, as if he was trying to come up with something to say. Nightshade purred as she nuzzled his side again, and the action seemed to flick a switch in his mind as he met Elias's eyes. You don't know what this week is, do you? Elias shrugged and shook his head. 3rd week of April? Elias offered. Nightshade snorted mildly, and for the first time since he had entered the room, she looked at him with a wide smile.
Oh, you're going to be having a lot of fun today, Bright. Chase, don't you dare tell him.
The Beckons aside. I wasn't going to, not in words at least. Saying what it is usually drives every mare nearby to a frenzy. I have no idea why, but hey, at least I'm safe this year. Nightshade rubbed against his neck and nibbled on his ear again.
I wouldn't quite say that, General, but let's just say that you have a pass until later,
Elias' eyes flicked between the two, looking for subtle differences. All he found was a gray feather behind Nightshade's ear, and a tuft of fur attached to a gold chain around Chaser's neck. The objects clearly meant something, but what? Chaser had mentioned being protected. From what? Starry Skies licked her lips as she stared at him, and it gave Elias another hint. It had something to do with the female ponies, that much was relatively clear. But what was he missing? He had the pieces, but not the whole puzzle. Elias certainly cursed his lack of social awareness, then doubly cursed himself for being distracted. He had tasks to do, and it wasn't to talk about subtle cultural nothings that had little to no impact on him. Elias let a scowl fall over his face, and he looked to one of the ponies, or rather zebra, that was actually working with his materials. Anything I can assist you with, General Everfree? Elias asked shortly, indicating clearly whatever Chaser and Nightshade were talking about didn't matter to him. The zebra looked up from his materials. No, and in fact, I do not think your consultation is needed. Your paperwork is impeccable. Give my compliments to your assistant. This will be invaluable in the coming days. Elias nodded, taking only a little pride in the zebra's praise. He was an odd one, Everfree, belonging to a small tribe of zebras that had migrated to Equestria centuries ago. It was one of the only 3 noble families in Camelot that weren't unicorns. Apparently, when they sought sanctuary with Celestia, they had offered their lifelong military aid in any wars the fledgling nation found itself embattled in, and as such, they were distinguished warriors. Everfree was the current family leader, and of the Solar Guard generals, he was the only one that Elias took no serious issues with, especially since he seemed respectful enough when Elias offered his assistance. I shall also respect the wishes of silence from General Nightshade, the zebra said smoothly. But I would recommend returning to your quarters to your office, General Bright, not unless you are seeking to be claimed. Elias opened his mouth to ask what he meant by claimed, but a glance at Starry Skies told him that she would show him quickly what that word meant in context if he didn't leave soon. Her nostrils flared, and her tail lashed back and forth excitedly as she quivered with anticipation. Perhaps taking Everfree's advice would be sound, until he had a greater idea on what was going on. Elias kept his cool as he collected his satchel, slinging it over his shoulder in a smooth motion. If you need any further assistance or clarification, I will be in my office for much of the day. Chaser and Everfree nodded, while Nightshade made a slight shooing motion as she smiled sadistically at Elias. Elias ignored her, moving back towards the throne room doors. Out of the corner of his eye, Elias saw Starry Skies drop from her position at the table and begin to follow him, but Nightshade quickly caught the mare's tail, and fast whispering seemed to cut through the air. What the words were, Elias didn't know, but they were clearly important as the energy seemed to completely leave the pony in the time it took him to reach and then open the throne room doors. He was sure he heard a sigh of disappointment as the doors closed behind him, but Elias ignored that as well. Did the distractions ever cease? Evidently not, because during his entire walk back to his office, Elias seemed to catch the eye of every member of the staff in the castle, all of whom, for some reason, were mares. Elias was certain that there was at least a few stallions on staff, but none of them seemed to exist anymore, and each turned corner found another pair of eyes that followed him down the halls. They drove up Elias's paranoia, and his steps subconsciously sped up as he sought the sanctuary of his office. The chair, his chair, was calling his name. Despite his best attempts to ignore the obvious tailor-made gift, Elias could only relax truly when he sank into the faux leather seat, designed specifically for him. Even mountains of paperwork breezed by in that chair, and Elias was becoming slowly more adept at finding solace in his office. He just needed to get there before the energy building in the air overflowed and crushed him under the manic weight. By the time he reached his office door, he had at least 2 tails, and the sound of sniffing followed him through the door, disappearing only once he shut the frosted glass and wooden barrier. Elias waited next to the door for a moment, keeping his hand on the handle and listening intently. The sound of some pony pawing at the door briefly came through, followed by a slight whimper. Disheartened, the pony trotted away, still sniffing the air. Elias waited until the sound of hoof steps were gone, then pulled away from the door. Bookbinder didn't look up from her desk as she toiled away at the stack of paperwork that never seemed to shorten.
Finding escape from the heat week in here, huh? Just make sure you leave soon. General Bright shouldn't come in, but it wouldn't surprise me if he did.
Elias blinked in the mirror and cocked his head. I did come in, Auditor. What is Heat Week? Bookbinder looked up the wall for a moment, her eyes blank as her mind processed the sound of his voice. Her head then turned to him, and her eyes lit up with happiness, followed swiftly by sheer panic. She dropped her quill and rose from her desk.
Elias, you need to go back to your room. You shouldn't be out, at all. I'll deliver some food. Make sure you have everything you need, but you really need to go back to your room.
Elias frowned as he let go of the door handle and straightened. Ignoring your breach in protocol. Why? What is Heat Week? Is this the reason the only mayors seem to be doing their jobs today? Bookbinder sighed, then rubbed at her forehead.
Right, okay. This is going to be a fun explanation. General, can I just refer to you by your name for a few minutes? This is a talk that parents usually have with their foals, and talking from assistant to general is just strange. It's a one-time thing. It's just very important that I not be distracted while I tell you about heat. I don't want to mess up the explanation.
Elias scowled, but he needed the answers more than he needed her to follow the rules. If it happened again, she knew the punishment, and at least she was asking first. Elias moved around the mare and set his satchel on the desk. He then calmly set down his chair, doing his best not to slouch in his comfortable leather. Alright, for the moment, Auditor, you are allowed to refer to me by name. Now, what is heat, and why should I be hiding from it? Bookbinder pulled her chair from behind her desk and sat before his, plopping down swiftly.
Alright, I'm assuming you know how children are made?
Elias rolled his eye and nodded. Yes, I can grasp the basics. Mom and Dad love each other, or not sometimes, and they do non-polite things in the bedroom. And 9 months later, a child is born. At least for humans. I'm assuming that just about everything is the same for ponies. Bookbinder nodded.
Functionally, yes. But what I suspect is the difference between humans and ponies is that mares mandatorily go into something called heat once a year. And while those seeking to have children go into a regular, milder heat once every few months, a spring heat happens every year without fail. It usually happens in the 3rd week of April, and is the only time that mares are forced to be sexually reproductive.
Forced? Elias echoed. Bookbinder nodded and bit her lip.
There's really no way to come at a spring heat, save for the obvious. Most mares take medication to dull the symptoms, and for those with mates, most of the symptoms go away. Since they do not have to actively seek out for a mate. For every pony else, however.
Oh, Elias said simply. Then understanding dawned in his mind. The looks, the sniffing, they were likely checking not for his scent, but the scent of another female on him. Elias was clean, especially given that Bookbinder wasn't near him anymore. He had essentially dove into a shark-infested waters while the sharks were in a blood rage. That wasn't good. Bookbinder nodded at his look of understanding.
Unless I staked my claim on him sometime this month, my scent will still be muddled. I like to keep him safe in my parents' house, just in case. Most mares will recognize him as taken and respectfully go away, but some go wild with desperation towards the end of the week, so I thought it better to be careful. Besides, my parents love having him around, and he loves helping them around the house, so who am I to risk him?
A relatively short episode today. I apologize, I know the cut seems abrupt, but I mean, this is honestly the only place I can cut this chapter in half, otherwise it'd be a 40-minute upload, and I just simply don't have the time for that at the moment. That aside, however, I would like to say I do have time to thank my wonderful Patreons. A little fucked up sense, but hey, you know, oh well. Thank you, Squall Windfeather, Wandy La Paz, Starlight Blaze, Rainflicker, and Dreamless Portal. Chase Lemaster, Sword Brother and Mordred, Danish Dash, Solus, R.D. Bryant, Captain Blue Shadow, Nocturne, HKH4 aka Texture, The Animated Ghost, and Canned Panzer. And of course a large thank you to Silent Titan. I appreciate you guys' support so much and it means a ton to me. That aside, however, this has been Firehearth. I hope you have a wonderful day.